The sewing machine is not what's missing from this picture. Sewing was never the hard part. On a shirt made entirely by hand, the cutting and stitching might be a day's work, maybe two. Getting to the point where you have cloth to cut is closer to a year. Because before a mountain woman could put a needle into anything, somebody had to grow a crop, rot it in a creek, beat it with a wooden club, comb it through iron spikes, spin it into thread 1 arm's length at a time, and then weave that thread into fabric on a loom the size of a bed. Every step by hand, every step with tools made on the property. By the end of this, you'll know the whole chain, in order: flax, wool, thread, cloth, color, cut, stitch. You'll know what it actually cost in hours. And you'll know why a family that could do all of this abandoned it almost overnight, the moment there was another option. It wasn't the sewing machine that killed it. It wasn't the store either. It was one specific step in the middle of the chain. And once that step was gone, the whole thing came apart inside a single generation. Cloth in the southern mountains came from 2 places: a flax patch and a handful of sheep. Cotton belonged to the lowlands and the plantation economy. Up in the hollows, it was linen and wool. Flax was sown thick in spring, on purpose. Crowded plants grow tall and straight and put out fewer branches, and fewer branches means longer fiber. In midsummer, it was pulled, not cut. Pull it up by the roots, and you keep the full length of the stalk. Cut it, and you've thrown away inches of fiber you cannot get back. Then the seed heads were stripped off through a comb, that's rippling, and the seed went back into the bin for next year, or got pressed for linseed oil. Now the strange part, the fiber you want is locked to a woody core by natural gums, and the way you break that bond is to let the plant rot in a controlled way and stop at exactly the right moment. That's retting. The bundles go into a pond or a slow stream or get spread on the grass in the dew, and they sit for days while bacteria eat the pectins holding everything together. Stop too early and the fiber won't release. You'll fight woody stalks that refuse to separate. Go too far and the fiber itself starts breaking down, and it will snap later in the process. There is no gauge. You pull a stalk every couple of days, bend it, and try to peel the fiber off the core. When it comes away easily but still feels strong, you're done. That judgment call was a skill, and it was the difference between a year's clothing and a rotted heap. Then it dries. Then the violence starts. Breaking, the dried stalks are cranked through a flax break, a hinged wooden jaw, until the brittle core shatters inside the fiber. Scutching, also called swingling. The broken flax is hung over an upright board and beaten downward with a wooden knife, scraping the shattered woody bits away. Hackling. The fiber is dragged through beds of iron spikes, coarse combs first, then finer ones, which straighten it out and pull the short, tangled fibers away from the long ones. The long, silky fiber is lined flax, and it makes good linen. The short stuff caught in the combs is tow, and it gets spun into coarse thread for grain sacks and rough work clothes. Tow is a pale, silvery blonde, which is exactly where the word tow-headed comes from, describing a child with hair that color. Wool ran a parallel track, shear in late spring, wash the fleece, pick it apart by hand to get the burrs and the dung tags out. Then card it, 2 paddles set with wire teeth, worked against each other until the fibers lie in the same direction and roll off as a soft cylinder called a rolag. Carding was endless. Children did it. Old people did it. It was the work you did while talking, and the work you handed to anyone in the room who wasn't already doing something else. Fleece also had to be sorted before any of that, because a single sheep does not grow a single quality of wool. The shoulders and sides give the best fibre. The breech, the wool around the hindquarters, is coarse and dirty and goes into blankets and rugs. Getting that wrong meant scratchy shirts. And at the end of all that, the growing, the rotting, the beating, the combing, you still have exactly nothing you can wear. You have fibre. Now somebody has to turn it into thread. This is the chapter the whole video turns on. There were usually 2 wheels in a mountain house. The great wheel, also called the walking wheel, stood over 5 feet tall, had no treadle, and was turned by hand. The spinner stood, drew the wool back with the left hand as the spindle twisted it, walked backward several steps, then walked forward again to wind the finished yarn on. Backward, forward, all day. Textile historians estimate that industrial spinners working this way covered something like the equivalent of 30 miles a week. Not walking to work, walking at work, in a room, in a few square feet. The second wheel was the flax wheel, smaller, foot-treadled, sat down to. Flax has to be spun wet, so there was a little dish of water at hand, and the spinner wet her fingers constantly as the fibre fed through. Now the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the entire story. A skilled spinner produces somewhere in the range of 200 to 300 yards of yarn per hour. That sounds like a lot until you work out how much yarn a piece of cloth actually swallows. Modern estimates put roughly 40 hours of skilled spinning into just the thread for a single pair of jeans. Not the growing, not the cleaning, not the carding, not the weaving, not the sewing, just the thread. Which is why, in the century before industrial spinning, it took at least 5 spinners working full-time to keep one weaver supplied. 5. That ratio is the reason the first machines of the Industrial Revolution were spinning machines, not weaving machines. Everyone in the trade knew exactly where the jam was. It is also why the word for an unmarried woman in English is spinster. That is not a metaphor, and it is not an insult about being left on the shelf. It is a job description. In a household economy where thread was the constraint on everything, an unmarried daughter was worth her weight in yarn, and the family put her on the wheel. So look at what a mountain household actually was. It was not a family that happened to make cloth. It was a small textile operation with a farm attached, and its production capacity was measured in how many pairs of hands could be kept spinning through the winter. The loom was not the bottleneck, the needle was not the bottleneck, thread was the bottleneck. Remember that, because in Chapter 5, it is going to decide everything. The loom was a barn frame job, heavy timber, 4 harnesses, built by somebody local and often assembled inside the room it would live in, because it wouldn't fit through the door otherwise. In a one-room cabin, it took a corner and it stayed there. Warping alone, measuring out hundreds of individual threads to identical length and getting each one through its own heddle and its own slot in the reed, could take a day or more before a single pick of weft went across. What came off the loom mostly was linsey-woolsey, linen warp, wool weft. That combination is not a compromise, it is an engineering decision. Linen is enormously strong under tension, which is what a warp thread needs to survive thousands of passes. Wool is warm and it doesn't have to be strong, because the weft just lies across. Linen for structure, wool for heat. It clothed the mountains for 200 years. Woolen cloth also got a finishing step almost nobody remembers: fulling. The woven wool was soaked, then pounded, in water, sometimes with urine as a source of ammonia, until the fibers matted together and the whole piece shrank and thickened into something dense enough to turn weather. A fulled coat could shed rain, an unfulled one could not. For bedding there were the coverlets, and this is where mountain weavers stopped being purely practical. The classic southern Appalachian coverlet is an overshot weave, a pattern weft floating over a plain ground, and traditionally indigo-dyed wool riding over natural linen. The patterns had names and travelled between households like tunes. Hand weaving in this style survived longer in the south than anywhere else in the country. Then colour. Walnut hulls, which stain everything they touch, gave brown and near black. Butternut bark gave a lighter brown and gave its name to the butternut-dyed homespun that clothed a great many Confederate soldiers, because that is what was in the house. Madder root gave red, bloodroot, sumac, goldenrod, onion skin, oak bark, pokeberry, though pokeberry fades, and everyone knew it. Indigo was the prize, and indigo was almost the only thing in this entire process that had to come from outside. It was bought in a lump, and it was treated accordingly. An indigo vat is chemistry, not cooking. Indigo doesn't dissolve in water. It has to be chemically reduced in an alkaline bath before it will take, which in a mountain kitchen meant lye from wood ash, wheat bran to feed the fermentation, and a pot kept warm for up to 2 weeks until the vat came. The moment the liquid turns yellow-green and is ready to work. Yarn dipped into that vat comes out looking wrong, yellow or sickly green. Then it hits the air, and in front of you it turns blue. She did not know she was watching an oxidation reaction. She knew that if the vat ran cold, or the ash was weak, or she dipped too soon, 2 weeks of tending and an expensive lump of imported dye were both gone. Now, finally, there is cloth in the house. There were no paper patterns. Commercial tissue patterns for home use did not arrive until the second half of the 19th century, and they arrived in cities first. So garments were drafted directly, measurements taken with a knotted string or a strip of cloth. Shapes cut as rectangles, squares and triangles wherever possible, with gussets under the arms to give movement, because a rectangle wastes no fabric, and fabric was measured in months of labor. Curved seams and shaped pieces are a luxury of people who can afford offcuts. The stitching was handwork, and it was better than most people assume. Running stitch for speed, back stitch where the seam had to hold. Felled seams, folded under and sewn down so the raw edges couldn't fray, because this garment had to last years and be taken apart and put back together more than once. Buttons were made at home too, thread wound over a small metal ring or over a disc of wood, bone, leather or shell, worked in patterns with names of their own. Hats were plaited from oat, rye or wheat straw, split and braided into a long ribbon, and then coiled and stitched into shape. Knitting handled everything the loom couldn't. Stockings, mittens, caps, all of it worked in the evenings, by firelight, by everyone. Children learned to knit young and were expected to contribute. Shoes came from the hides of the family's own animals, tanned in a pit with oak or hemlock bark, and made up by a travelling cobbler who came through and worked in the house for a few days. Well into the 19th century, most shoes were built on straight lasts, no left and no right, identical shoes. You wore them on alternate feet to spread the wear, and they molded to you over time. And here is the correction the title needs. Nobody had a wardrobe. That word implies a range of things to choose from. What existed was 2 changes of clothing for most people, and one for many, a working set and a meeting set, and the meeting set became the working set once it got too worn for church. Clothing was named in wills and left to specific people, because it was genuinely a bequest of value. Garments got turned inside out so the unfaded side showed. Adult clothes were cut down for children. Children's clothes went down to the next child. Worn cloth became quilt pieces, then rags, then wound around things or stuffed into things. And linen rags had actual cash value because rag merchants bought them to make paper. Nothing was thrown away because nothing in the house had been cheap. Every square inch of it represented somebody's hours. Which raises the question this whole video has been building toward. If a household could do all of this entirely on its own, using nothing it hadn't grown or made, why did it stop? Take the obvious answer off the table first. Elias Howe patented a lock-stitch sewing machine in 1846. Isaac Singer patented his in 1851. Singer's real innovation wasn't mechanical. It was his partner Edward Clark, who in 1856 introduced the hire purchase plan, the first consumer installment payment scheme in the United States, and put salesmen on the road to collect the weekly payments in person. Sales tripled in the first year. That machine changed American households enormously. But go back to Chapter 2 and look at where the labor actually sat. Sewing was never the constraint. A sewing machine dropped into a house that still had to spin its own thread would have saved a few days a year out of hundreds. The chain did not break at the needle. It broke in the middle, and it broke gradually, which is why almost nobody noticed it happening. The first crack was the carding mill, small water-powered carding machines spread through rural America, and a family could carry a fleece to the mill and carry back finished rolls ready to spin. It cost a little money or a share of the wool. It saved an enormous number of hours of the dullest work in the house. Fulling mills, which shrank and thickened woven wool, did the same thing at the other end. This is the part of the myth worth puncturing. The self-sufficient mountain household was never quite self-sufficient. It ran on small local infrastructure, and the moment that infrastructure existed, households used it. The second crack was bought thread, and this one was fatal, because thread was the bottleneck. Industrial spinning made yarn cheaper than a household could ever produce it. Not slightly cheaper, but cheaper by an order of magnitude in labor. The wheels went quiet first. You can see it in estate inventories, spinning wheels sitting unused years before the looms did. The third crack was cheap factory cloth, and after that, the loom in the corner became a coverlet loom, then a curiosity, then firewood. And here is the part that closes the circle. As the southern textile industry pushed into the Piedmont through the 1880s and after, the mills needed hands. They recruited from exactly these households. Rural white families moved off the land and into company-owned mill villages, paid wages, and buying their food at a company store. So the granddaughter of the woman at the walking wheel went to work spinning thread. The same product, the same motion. 10 or 12 hours a day for a wage in somebody else's building, to make the cloth her grandmother used to make at home. That is the whole trade, stated plainly. She lost a skill and gained an income. She lost hundreds of hours of unpaid labor and gained a boss. Don't let this land as a lament, because it isn't one. Nobody was tricked. Hand spinning is brutally hard work. It fell overwhelmingly on women and children, and it was unpaid, invisible, and endless. The instant a real alternative existed, people took it, quickly and without much apparent regret. That is not a failure of memory or of character. Given the arithmetic, it is the only rational thing they could have done. But be honest about what was actually lost, because it isn't the sewing. What went was the arithmetic itself, the knowledge of what a shirt costs. Hundreds of hours of growing, rotting, beating, combing, spinning, weaving, dyeing, and stitching stood between a mountain family and a single change of clothes, and every person in that house carried the number in their hands and their back. We now buy a shirt for the price of a sandwich, and none of us can tell you what it cost to make. That's not nostalgia, it's just the receipt going missing. The wardrobe was never the achievement. The wardrobe was 2 sets of clothes and a pair of straight-lasted shoes. The achievement was that a family could stand in an empty field in April and know, step by step, exactly how to end up dressed,